everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today is another episode of our real life stories, and those real life stories are inspirational stories because of parents that have lost a loved one and then gone on to do remarkable things. And today is no exception. Today our guest is Brian Smith. Hi Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
And as I said at the start of the show, you are an exception because what happened after your experience of losing your daughter and where you are now is pretty remarkable. Can you tell the people at home what happened, please?
Sure. My daughter, Shayna, actually her name is Shayna Elaine Smith. She was 15 years old when she passed suddenly in June of 2015. She was a great athlete. She was really good in school. We homeschooled her for most of her school career, but she had gone to school for a couple of years before she passed away after her freshman year, I should say. So she had been out on a volleyball trip. She and her mother had gone to Florida. We live in Ohio. They'd gone for a trip. She'd just gotten back home. My other daughter, Kayla, had left. So my other daughter was on vacation. She was away. And it was a beautiful June day. I remember I went out for a walk that morning, as I always do. And I got back from my walk and I was sitting at my desk where I'm sitting right now. And I heard my wife scream from upstairs. And she had gone up to Shayna's room. And Shayna was supposed to work for us. We had a home business at the time. And Shayna was supposed to come to work. And she hadn't showed up. My wife was texting her and just assuming she had overslept. But when she walked into the room, Shayna was unresponsive. So I did CPR on her. We called the ambulance. They came, and long story short, she passed away. She was at the hospital, or actually she had done it at home, but she was declared legally dead at the hospital a few hours later. So it was obviously a shock. She was, as I said, she was healthy. She was vibrant. She just played in the volleyball tournament. She played basketball at a competitive level, national competitive level. She was a great athlete. She did have this condition called Wolff-Parkinson's-White, and we've been seeing a cardiologist for it. In this condition, your heart speeds up, and they said there's two different types of way this happens, and they've done tests on Shayna. They said hers is the more benign way. It's not a threat to her life or anything. We'll monitor her over the next couple of years. She'd worn her heart monitor for a month. She'd had a couple of procedures. And the procedures didn't work, but they said it might be a little annoyance, but she had never even lost consciousness. She had never had been hospitalized or anything for it. So it's it's called a sudden unexplained death in children. That's the way we describe it when people ask what happened. The cardiologist and the autopsy she said one thing, or not the cardiologist, but the coroner said one thing. The cardiologist said, no, I don't think that would have caused it. So we don't know. We honestly just don't know. It's just we do know she passed away. So that was the beginning of my journey of grief, of shock and awe and just devastation that a parent has when you lose a child. When you're, it was interesting because Shayna had been away the week before, and when your children are out of the house and they're minor children, you feel like, okay, I can't protect them because she's gone. And the ironic thing is that she was at home in her bed, under my roof, right down the hall from me when she slipped away. So it was something that was very difficult to accept, understanding like what happened, why did this happen? Did we do something wrong? Should we have taken her to another doctor? Should we have known this was coming? All those types of questions go through your mind and when you're a parent and this happens, because as a father, your job is to protect your family. As a mother, your job is to protect your child. Anybody that's had children knows that feeling that you have when you're so vulnerable, because the worst thing that can happen is something happened to your child. Something happened to you, yeah, that's okay. But something happened to your child is the worst possible thing that could happen, at least in our imaginations. And that's what we experienced.
First of all, we're deeply sorry for your loss. And as a parent myself of two children, those who haven't lost, and you said yourself, you just can't imagine. It's your worst fear. For for yourself and your family? What was next on that process, Brian?
Well, it's interesting when I tell the story about Shayna, I start there, which is kind of in the middle for me in terms of my life. When Shayna passed, I was in my mid-50s at the time, and I had always had this fear of death from the time I was a child. I had this intense fear of death. I would wake up in the middle of the night, scared I was going to die. I'd have panic attacks, and it was based upon some religious trauma I had when I was young. But I'd worked through a lot of that. I'd seen a counselor. I really dove into studying the afterlife. I'd started studying mediumship and near-death experiences and any kind of afterlife research I could get my hands on to try to understand. Okay, they taught me this one thing in Sunday school, and I know this isn't true. And then the world's telling me another thing, which is like there is no spirit, there is no afterlife. It's all just here. And I don't think that's true. And if it is, that's pretty tragic.
Yeah.
So what's real? And I'm a very analytical person by nature. So I'm an engineer. I was like, let me study this. So by the time Shayna had passed, I'd been studying this for probably close to 20 years. And I realized that we don't end when our bodies end, that we do go somewhere, that we do continue on. What I didn't understand is that we can have a connection with those people. I thought, well, we go to heaven, we go to this other place. So I was really blessed in that I didn't have that feeling of like, is Shayna okay? I always knew she was okay even from the moment that they said that she was no longer in her body. I just looked at it as like, she's not in her body. Yeah. She's gone somewhere else. So I did have that, but what I didn't know, as I said, is I could have that relationship with her. And even though I knew she was okay, it was like, she was 15. I wanted more time with her.
Yeah.
I wanted to see her grow up. I wanted to see her graduate from high school. I wanted to see her get married. I wanted, all those things that you imagine for your children.
Yeah.
And I felt like that had been taken, not necessarily from her, but from me. And what's really interesting, a few months later, I'd been listening to podcasts, and I met Roberta Grimes through her podcast, and she connected me with a woman named Suzanne Wilson, who's one of the world's best mediums, in my opinion. And I had a reading with Suzanne, and one of the amazing things she said to me, she said, I see Shayna with car keys. And I said, really? She goes, yeah. Was she like about 15 or 16? Well, Shayna was 15 and a half. And where we live, like in a few weeks, she would have been able to get her temporary driving permit. And she really wanted that driving permit. She wanted nothing more than to drive.
Yeah.
And what that told me is that, we don't miss out on things on the other side. Shayna was showing Suzanne, I can do the things here that I wanted to do there. So
yeah,
I knew she wasn't missing out. But again, what about me? What about my family, my wife, my other daughter, Kayla, who's 3 years older than Shayna? So we found an organization called Helping Parents Heal. And through that, we met other parents who had lost children. And we started to understand this way of believing or understanding that our children's lives have not been cut short. Their lives are not in vain, no matter how long or short they were. I've met people whose children were in their 40s and 50s when they passed. And I met people whose children passed in utero. They had miscarriages.
Yeah.
No matter how short children's lives are, they have meaning, they have worth, they have value. And so I've learned, to carry on Shayna's legacy, basically. So start working with Helping Parents Heal not even a year after Shayna passed, and worked with them on an informal basis for about three or 4 years. And then I started doing what I do now, which is my grief to growth business.
Yeah.
Where I help people understand this perspective of life and to get over these devastating losses and to move forward with our children. I remember when Shayna passed, someone said something about moving on, and I hated that. I was like, I don't want to move on because I'm a very visual person. So I would see like me and Shayna, walking down this road until she was 15, and then she stops, and then I move on. And it was like, I felt like every day I was getting farther away from her, and I hated that. I like the phrase moving forward. I move forward with Shayna. So she's still part of my life. She's a very big part of my life, as you can see from the picture behind me and the work that I do in her memory. But I also know that I'm going to see her again. So I have this vision now of every day I'm actually moving one step closer to her. And that brings me comfort.
So mediumship has an important role to play within grief. How would you define? I mean, it's interesting as well, Brian. You said you've been researching it for so long, which is interesting that you've had that aspect to your life as well. But
Mm-hmm.
how important was that in your journey to move forward?
Oh, it was vital. And this is, again, these are things I would have never thought about several years ago. But Suzanne Wilson was one of the people that told me that she said, Shayna says this had to happen, that this was planned. And I'd never heard of that concept before. And I thought, well, that's crazy. Why would this have to happen?
Yeah.
Why would I plan this? Why would, she plan this? But then I realized this fear of the death that I had from the time I was young set me on this mission to really understand it. So at this point now, I've been researching it for probably, I don't know, 30 or 40 years, at least 30 years. So that set me up, and to know that when Shayna passed, that, to have that deeper understanding. So when it comes to what I do, I think this is what I was meant to do.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly enough, I keep mentioning Suzanne because we have so much in common. Her grandfather was a pastor. My grandfather was a pastor, and I always felt like this like calling to follow in his footprints. But I was like, but I don't. I give it up on Christianity, and I didn't want to be a Christian preacher, and I do what I do. And I realize what I do now is it is a ministry. It is a type of work like he was doing, and he actually came through in that first reading. And this is before I was doing any of this stuff. This was only 6 months after Shayna passed. I wasn't even dreaming about this. And he said he was proud of me, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because here I am sitting on the phone talking to a medium, which he would have never been for when he was in the body. But I think that I was meant to carry on his legacy, and Shayna and I, we did plan this out.
But again, another concept that people are not necessarily going to take on. Some people are going to be at that stage angry,
Mm-hmm.
still asking
Mm-hmm.
those questions of why me? Why did this happen to us?
It's a valid question. Humans are always trying to make meaning out of things. And when something like this tragic happens to you, the way I look at people, again, I'm a very rational person. So I'm like, you have choices. You can choose A or B. So you can choose, actually, there's probably A, B, or C. You can choose it's God's fault.
Yeah.
God did this to me for some reason. Maybe God's just cruel. Maybe God doesn't care. Maybe God is punishing me. You can choose to believe I live in a random, meaningless universe and stuff just happens. And this has happened. Or you can choose to believe there's some meaning behind this. There's something that I'm to learn from this. There's some reason I'm to grow from this. Now, we can't know which of those things is true with absolute certainty.
Yeah.
But I ask people to try it on, right? So at first, it might sound crazy that you would have planned this. It might even make you angry that someone would suggest it. But if you sit with it for a while, then and just examine the possibility. And I tell to people, instead of starting with like the loss of a loved one, loss of a child, the most extreme thing, think about something that happened to you in your youth that you were really upset about. In my case, I got divorced when I was in my early 20s, or getting fired from a job, or having an illness. Something good typically comes out of those things. Now, we don't see it right away. It might take decades for us to see it, but something good typically comes out of that.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, what if we play with the idea of like, if I'm an eternal being and I've got many lifetimes, and when I quote die, I don't die, I'm just going back into spirit. Might I have planned this for some reason? And just sit with the possibility. And for me, it started to make sense that I would, from that perspective, not from the human perspective, but from the soul's perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a unique perspective as a parent, Brian. You've done so much work, like you say, before even the loss of your daughter. And like you said, was it pre-planned? I don't believe in coincidences personally, but there's still that kind of gray area where a lot of people are going to be angry. And you're right. People need to make a choice to try to help them move forward. But I kind of want to take that a bit further, but then go into the mediumship itself in terms of how do you choose a medium? do you have any tips or ideas, or you can recommend mediums that for parents that are grieving so much I mean, even the work of we interviewed Robert Schwartz recently on the show, and soul planning. I mean, even reading up on
Mhm.
this stuff really helps parents. But specifically with mediumship itself, it can be, forgive me guys, I don't want to insult anybody, but there's certain people on TikTok and certain places you can go to, which can be, people can say stuff. But is anything for you that sticks out within mediumship that's, trying to find those more ethical mediums?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, the old me would go back to the rational thing, like, okay, research them, get references, stuff like that. And the rational mind is great. That's fine. But I also say use your intuition. So, find a list of mediums that are reputable, and there are sites that actually will have tested mediums.
Yeah,
My friend Mark Eiland has a site where he has trusted mediums listed. There's a site called VerySoul, which is really cool concept. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but you can go to VerySoul and you can get readings for very inexpensive,
really
for
good.
mediums that are frankly training, but they're also vetted before they get to that level. I have a list of mediums that I trust, so people sometimes ask me for that. So yeah, use your mind. I say there are bad mediums, there are medium mediums, there are good mediums, there are excellent mediums, and there are frauds. And we can't deny the fact that there are frauds. They are out there. And there are, frankly, people that aren't frauds that just don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, vet them. And also understand that, you're going to be some good ones and some bad ones. So if you do get a bad reading, or you find somebody that's a fraud, for example, that doesn't mean they're all bad or they're all frauds. So I would say try it a couple of times before you make a decision on mediumship in general. My experience with mediums has been fantastic, but I'm kind of a unique position. A lot of times they come to me, or I'm a test sitter for various platforms. So I've sat with some mediums of test setting. So what I can say with 100% certainty is that mediumship is real, that there are people that can connect with the other side beyond any shadow of a doubt. Dr. Gary Schwartz has done research on this. Julie Beisel's done research on this. There have been mediums that have been tested. And so it's real, but finding that right medium for you is really important.
But Brian, can we come back to what you're doing now and how you're helping other people with this?
Sure. What I do now is I work with people in various ways. I'm trying to make myself as available as possible. So I have a podcast. I've written a book. I have a YouTube channel, so people can listen to me that way. I also work with people one-on-one. So I take on clients that want to sit down and talk with me about, like, again, religious trauma maybe, or where is my loved one now, or how do I know this is real? And I can help people with resources, talking through the guilt that often is associated with grief, the anger that's associated with grief. So I can help people talk through that. I help people with what we call mental fitness. So you have this perspective, right? But how do you hold on to it when things get rough? So I work with clients on that basis. And I'm just starting, as we're recording this, I'm starting up small support groups where people can come to me, and we're going to be doing small groups. So those are starting actually in a couple of weeks. So I try to meet people where they are. Everybody's got different needs. Again, some people would come to me because it's like, my son took his life. Is he in hell? Because that's what the Bible says. Or I'd like to see a medium, but the Bible tells me I can't.
Yeah.
And I refer them to, like, my friend Daniel John, who's a strict Catholic, who's a medium. Or I got several friends who are mediums who are also Christians, and try to get people, like, there's a different perspective to read the Bible from, by the way. The
Absolutely.
people that say that mediums are evil, that's not true. That's not what the Bible says.
Yeah.
So I again try to help people, free people up from that, because it's really sad that mediumship, a good medium reading, can be as helpful as a year or more of grief therapy.
Yeah.
Feeling that connection with your loved one, knowing that they're still there, knowing they didn't know what's going on in your life even today,
Yeah.
hearing that they forgive you if you're having trouble forgiving yourself. That knowing is so helpful. And I hate to see anybody held back from having that experience.
Yeah. But unfortunately, it might be people's religious perspective, as we said, and or just fear. Fear can stop people reaching out.
Unfortunately, religion, and I don't want to pick on any specific religions, but I was raised, as I said, in the Christian church, and then a lot of this is Christians. It's not exclusively to Christians. I think some Muslims believe that mediums are bad too, and a lot of people who are frankly materialists believe that all mediums are frauds. So
Yeah.
there is this thing when you're a medium, you've got to constantly prove yourself.
Yeah.
But the thing is that a lot of times religion uses fear to control us. And when you read something in the Bible or someone's telling you something, try to understand where that perspective is coming from. Why are they saying this? Now, again, as an example, as being raised as a Christian, we're taught that there's hell, right? But the Jewish scriptures, which precede Christianity, there's no mention of a place of eternal punishment. The word that's translated in the King James as hell is actually the word Sheol, which just means grave, and it's a place where everybody went. And it's actually interesting as the Bible translations get better and better, the word hell is actually literally disappearing from the Bible because they're realizing, no, this should have been Sheol, or this should have been Tartarus, or this should have been Gehenna. None of these places are places of eternal punishment. But why did the people start saying that? Why did the priests and that class say that? Well, it's a way of controlling the masses.
Absolutely.
If I tell you you only have one chance at life, and if you don't get it right, you're going to suffer eternally. You're going to listen to everything that I have to say. So it's a control thing. It's not. And think about it. What kind of a God would do that? When my daughter Kayla was born, as Shayna's older sister, I was just coming out of that religious trauma. And I remember looking at her and thinking, if God loves me more than I love my daughter, which supposedly he does, right? Then he could never eternally damn me. I might be angry with her for a while. I might even punish her for an afternoon or a week. But is there anything she could possibly do that would make me eternally torment her? And the answer is absolutely not. No reasonable human being would do that.
Yeah.
So why would you believe a God would do that?
Okay, here's a tough one, Brian. If you was that person, or there was somebody in front of you that feared connecting to a medium, but you knew the worth of that, how would you help that person?
I have a friend that just reached out to me yesterday, and we're supposed to talk later this afternoon. Her son passed away a couple of years ago, I think it was. Known her for a while. We're not really super close. She sent me a message yesterday. She said, I'm thinking about seeing a medium. And she said, I want to know what your wife thinks about it, which I thought was really interesting. And what I say to people is, again, be rational, be logical. Why wouldn't you see a medium? Okay, well, they could be frauds. Okay, so you might be out $200. You might be out some money. Are they evil? No, I know a lot of mediums, and I can tell you, I've known these people personally for a very long time. And I think again about my friend Daniel John, who when his gifts started opening up, he was sitting at dinner with someone whose husband had passed, and he starts getting a download of what's going on. He didn't even know what was happening.
Yeah.
And he starts reading her, and he's like, what is going on? And then he realizes, okay, this is mediumship. And he got his Bible out, he prayed about it. I mean, he searched diligently and realized, okay, this is what I have to do. This is, God told him, this is a gift that I've given you.
Yeah.
And he's just one of many mediums I know who are very spiritual. And not all mediums are Christians and don't have to be, but all the mediums I know, they are ministers in the true sense of the word, is that they are serving spirit. They're serving their clients. They're very highly ethical people. So I try to help people. Okay, let's eliminate the fear. Let's think through this logically. Let's think through this rationally. What's the worst thing that happened, and what's the best thing that can happen? You might make a connection with your loved one.
Yeah.
How would that change your life? So why wouldn't you give it a try?
Absolutely. On a personal note, and sorry to ask this question, but you had such an in-depth knowledge of mediumship before, sadly, your daughter Shayna passed away. How was your wife's perspective? How did was there a rift between you? Could you help her with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, we were very fortunate. It's really interesting because when I was going through all this soul searching and trauma and, researching afterlife, she's like, what? She didn't get it. So we'd be lying in bed at night, and I'm reading books about mediumship and near death experiences, and she's reading romance novels, and she just had no interest. Um, and her father had passed away a few years before Shayna from dementia, but he was older, and it was dementia. And if you've lost anyone to dementia, you realize it's a slow passing away, and by the time they go, a lot of times what you really feel is relief, as for them and for so it's relief. But when Shayna passed, it's like, okay, this is what really wakes people up, and this is what woke her up. So fortunately, again, I could help walk her through a lot of that. We discovered Helping Parents Heal not too long after that, so she got really involved in that. So she wasn't resistant to any of it, and kind of had a little bit of an arm ramp because of all the work that I had done.
Yeah.
She's had medium readings, since then. She's
great.
Attended the conferences with me. I'm on the board of Helping Parents Heal, but she's really, really involved with it as well. She's been to every conference that we've had. So it's been really great for us, And there's a myth I like to talk about, that when you lose a child, when a couple loses a child, that you're headed for divorce. And I'll never forget, it was a little while after Shayna passed, a well-meaning friend, called to console me, and she said something like, well, it's just too bad about, the divorce statistics or something, that you guys are likely to get divorced. And I was like, yeah, I'm not buying that. And I've actually done research on that, and I found that is a myth. It's not true.
Okay.
And I found that grief can exacerbate cracks that are already there. So I can see people can break apart.
Yeah.
If you don't honor each other's grief, and though because we might grieve differently, that can cause division, but can actually bring people closer together. And I've seen that happen as well. So it's not necessarily that you're gonna like drift apart. And it's actually, I think, for my wife and I think in a way, it's brought us closer together. It's something that we have, deeply in common. My daughter was over the other night, my daughter Kayla, and she goes, you guys believe some woo-woo S word, and I was like, well, what do you mean? She goes, there's mediumship and soul planning and all that stuff. But that's what we talk about. That's what my wife and I talk about: soul planning, mediumship, afterlife stuff. And it's changed our perspective on everything. I mean, we're going through a lot of political turmoil right now in the US and around the world. And I'm fairly calm about it because I believe in soul planning on an individual and a collective basis.
Yeah.
So it's something that's really changed our perspective on life.
Yeah. Yeah. Brian, you are an inspiration. The work that you're doing to help people is again inspirational. There's no other word I can think of to describe it. Can you tell us the name of your podcast, where we can find you?
Yeah, sure. The name of my podcast is Grief, and it's the numeral 2 growth.com. So Grief to Growth is the name of my podcast. It's the name of my book. It's also my website. And if you go to my website, you can find, all the stuff about me. I do have a free online community. It's Grief to Growth, grief2growth.com/community. And it's free for people to join. I do have a little application process to keep out, crazy people, but people can find out more about my work there. And that's it. Yeah.
I just want to pick your brains before we say goodbye and say thank you very much for joining us. And we're also going to run a little tribute to your daughter, Shayna, after we've completed this. So stick around for that, guys. I just wanted to ask you, is there something you would like to see change within the grief community, for want of a better word?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I like to see, I really kind of struggle with saying this because, like, for example, I'm a certified grief educator. I took the course from David Kessler, and I've worked with a lot of chaplains, and chaplains are like, we're not allowed to impose our religious or spiritual beliefs on people.
Yeah.
And that's all fine. But the thing is, I don't view what I believe as particularly, it's definitely not religious. And I don't like this categorizing as spiritual versus secular or whatever.
Yeah.
This is where the evidence leads. And what I'd really like to see is a stop stigmatizing what we call woo-woo, stop stigmatizing spiritual, and let's go where the evidence leads. Physicists tell us that time is an illusion. They tell us that consciousness is a real thing that has an impact on the world. We've got experiments that show that.
Yeah.
Mediums have been tested. So I'd like for us to, use our rational minds. Don't be snowed, don't it's not just wishful thinking.
Yeah.
But also, let's just not say this is impossible, that this is crazy, because it's most certainly not. So I like to see that shift, and I like to see the materialists start to prove their point of view, as opposed to us having to prove what it is that we understand and know.
Brian, it's been an absolute pleasure this afternoon interviewing you. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story.
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me. It was great.
Pleasure.